live.
Hello and welcome to the first virtual executive meeting. I'd like to thank all of those joining us today, whether you're watching it from home, the councillors that have made it to our first meeting using Zoom, and all of the officers that are on the call as well. I'm sure it's going to be the first of very many virtual meetings that City of York Council will hold tonight, the executive, and very shortly looking to do planning, licensing hearings, and then other meetings in due course. Just one of the very many ways that we're all having to work differently at the moment. So you've all had, and you'll have seen, the formal agenda of the executive meeting. I haven't got any apologies to note, as all the executive members and councillors are here, so welcome everybody. The first item is declarations of interest. For councillors who want to speak, they need to raise their virtual hand, and then I'll call you and bring you into the meeting if you have a comment or question or a point to make. And obviously I'll make it very clear for the public watching at home who I'm bringing in to speak and when, so that they can hear clearly what everybody is saying. So I can't see any hands up on declarations of interest. The only thing that I would personally like to say is that it's very much a personal interest in relation to agenda item 4, as that's investment at Fulford School, and I'm the local councillor for Fulford, but not beyond that. So without any further declarations of interest, we move on to agenda item 2, the minutes of the last executive meeting that were held on Thursday, the 19th of March, and that's between pages 1 to 14 in the agenda pack. And the way that we're going to vote on items this evening, and we'll test it out on the minutes, is after a little while I will ask executive members to show that they're in favour of the recommendation that's been put forward, in this case to accept the minutes of the last meeting, and then I'm going to want executive members to show very clearly physically with their hands that they're in favour. I will check that is a consensus of opinion in favour of the recommendation, and then declare that afterwards. And obviously we've got a democracy officer on the call, and indeed our monitoring officer to make sure that we do that right and make sure it's a clear declaration. So in terms of the item 2 and the minutes, could I please see those in favour of accepting those as a correct record? So thank you all, everybody. So that's a clear consensus in favour of accepting the minutes from the last meeting. That takes us on to agenda item 3, public participation. We don't have any registered speakers for tonight's executive meeting. We have put the mechanism in place, so in future meetings, and I'm sure through planning in particular, many residents can and will be able to ring in and take active parts in all of the virtual meetings that we're going to be doing and putting on. The one thing I would just like to note for the minutes is that we have received 2 written comments, one from York Central Action Group and one from Mr. Richard Clark, and both of that case, the organisation and the individual requested that their correspondence was circulated to executive members, and I'd just like to confirm that has happened and taken place. On York Central, I'd very briefly like to mention how committed the executive are to making York Central happen. It has outline planning permission. The reserve matters planning application has been submitted over recent weeks by the partnership. The council has drawn together a £155 million infrastructure package to make that development happen, which will see public spaces, housing and commercial opportunities delivered. And we're very keen to progress at pace and have those conversations with the groups about that scheme and what it can mean, particularly at this moment in time. It is important that the government continues to support the scheme and that the government makes sure that the money that they offered through the budget process is there with Homes England, and that we can then make that scheme happen for both York and our wider region. On that, it then takes us through onto the next item 4, which is Fulford School remodelling. So what I'm going to do at this stage is bring in the relevant officer to introduce the report. After the officers introduce the report, just like when we had the executive meetings in West offices instead of our respective kitchens, living rooms and homes, I'll then go to the executive member, so in this case Councillor Cuthbertson, to make any initial comments before opening it up to questions and comments for others. So Amanda Hatton, who's the Director of Children's Services, if you could introduce this report, please. And you've by magic appeared.
You've got a report in front of you that outlines two schemes in relation to Fulford School. They would both allow us to expand the number of places in the school from September of this year, which we need to do as part of our statutory duty to provide sufficient places for our children across York. Clearly, schooling and plans for schooling in the pandemic are still uncertain, and we're not sure yet when schools will reopen. Even if we're in a position where we're still in a restricted amount of children in school at any given time, the additional classrooms which are suggested in the scheme will allow us to socially distance in school more easily. The other aspect of the scheme is in relation to travel and making the site a safer way for children to be dropped off at school and collected. That's it.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Councillor Cuthbertson.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me all right?
I can, yes.
Fine, okay. I'm probably going to be a little longer than Amanda, but I want to say that pressure on places on the south side of the city has been building for some years now, and it's been an issue for the Fulford district and its school catchment area for a while. It's a perennial problem in York, and school places planning team is constantly keeping an eye on it. The situation is influenced by economic development, by new housing development, and the popularity of particular schools. So we don't know what's going to happen after the pandemic, but we do need to move forward on this. So I'm happy to support this. Equally, the issue of access to the school via Fulford Gate has been a problem for some time. There's a very narrow access to the school entrance along Fulford Gate and limited room to manoeuvre even at present for buses to turn round at the school entrance. So the proposed access from the south side of the school should ease these problems considerably. And again, I'm happy to support this proposal alongside the extra classroom space for increased numbers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cuthbertson. So I'm looking at the participants bar in case anybody wants to ask any questions or comments at this stage. Again, you just need to raise your hand. And through our new rules, if for any reason the raising hand function virtually fails, obviously you can wave and catch my attention, and I'll do a quick check of the screen to make sure on every item that there isn't anybody else that wants to speak. So on this one, I can't see any, and I'd just echo Councillor Cuthbertson's comments with a thanks to partners, particularly the school, council officers, the parish council, the local sports groups that have been working together to try and bring forward the plans that enables the school to expand and also helps resolve some of the parking, traffic and access issues in that immediate area. And I'm sure that we'll all look forward to working together through that particular project. So with that being moved by Councillor Cuthbertson, we've got the recommendations in report 4. So I'd like to see those in favour of those recommendations, please. Thank you very much. So that's a clear consensus in favour of that recommendation. And that moves us on now to agenda item 5, term dates for the 21-22 school year. And I'll hand back to Amanda Hatton to introduce it to us.
So you have before you a short paper which outlines the proposed dates for the school year going forward. It's a paper that in ordinary circumstances would have gone to an executive member decision, but in the current situation is coming to executive tonight for approval. Clearly, given the current pandemic situation, we don't know yet when children will be back at school, but we have to put forward our formal school term dates for the forthcoming year.
Thank you very much. And again, I'll go to Councillor Cuthbertson first.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to support the term and holiday dates proposed. because these fit with the rest of our neighbouring authorities. Although Leeds and Sheffield have got a fixed break at the first 2 weeks of April for their Easter holidays, this arrangement has worked successfully in past years, and it seems sensible for us to continue to propose this for the forthcoming year. Alongside this, Chair, if I may, I'd like to thank key workers who've continued working during the lockdown and social distancing period, and to the teachers, support staff and everyone else who's continued to support and to promote York's children and young people during this difficult time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And just like the last item, if there are any comments or questions from councillors, now is the time to indicate. I can't see any again. So in that case, they've got the recommendations in front of us on agenda item 5. So can I please see those in favour of those recommendations? Thank you very much. That's a clear consensus, and we can now move to agenda item 6, which is an update on the council's response to COVID-19. And I'm going to first hand over to Ian Floyd to introduce the report to us. Ian.
Thank you, Keith. Just want to start really by saying, obviously, clearly the last few weeks have seen great sadness across the country. Many thousands of lives have obviously been lost in recent weeks, and many thousands of families have been affected. And clearly our thoughts go out to all those affected by this national and indeed worldwide tragedy. In particular, clearly thoughts are with York residents who have suffered loss. Obviously, in terms of this report, it sets out in some detail the council's response to the national crisis. I wanted to first thank all of our staff. Their contribution across the whole council has been enormous, and there are many, many examples of staff who have stepped up to produce an incredible response across the city. Staff have volunteered for new roles, have accepted redeployment where needed, and I've been incredibly proud to hear on a daily basis how staff have responded to the crisis. This has very much been a whole council response, and the report sets out a range of areas where workers have been undertaken. I also wanted to thank residents in the city who have complied with the lockdown measures, and businesses in the city who again have been outstanding. Those businesses that have been able to continue to operate have implemented a range of measures to enable safe working. I also wanted to thank all our partner organisations, including the NHS organisations, volunteer networks and other public sector bodies. In particular, to also thank the thousands of volunteers who came forward to support our community response. Clearly, we owe a huge thanks to everyone within the NHS for the outstanding work they have done. So the report sets out a range of activity across the council in response to the crisis. In addition, however, it also sets out a very significant financial challenges facing the organisation, and Debbie may wish to say more in a few minutes about that. I think a lot of the report is clearly self-explanatory, so I won't go through it in any detail, and I'm sure executive members may themselves wish to highlight some particular areas of work. I do, however, just want to say a few words about the next steps, which are briefly covered in the report, but which I can add to. Firstly, in most emergencies, what you have is effectively a response phase, and then a recovery phase follows. In this case, we do expect the response may be with us for some time, and the need to deal in particular with the need for care services to our residents. However, we do need to look ahead and develop our recovery phase. So we'll be looking at that over the next few weeks, but also over the next few months and beyond. It's without doubt that recent events will have a lasting effect for a long time, both upon residents and businesses. Our response requires a recovery plan. And our recovery plan will need to set out some of the key actions that a council will need to take, working with partners, businesses and residents to restore this great city and to rebuild the economy and to ensure residents and communities receive the support they need. For the local resilience forum that will cover York and North Yorkshire, and we're playing a leading role in that. However, it's also crucial the authority develops its own recovery strategy and moves at pace on this. Critical to the recovery are two strands. That's economic recovery and community recovery. And on the first, in terms of economic recovery, we'll need to work with partners, businesses, local enterprise board to develop plans to ensure the city's economy can function effectively. On the second aspect, in terms of community recovery, this very much will need to be focused upon dealing with the impacts to vulnerable groups and the financial hardship that many may face. We also need to protect children, support families, support schools, and deliver effective care services going forward. We also know there's a need for a major review of our financial plans. So we need to create some capacity in certain areas to invest in new priorities. That may mean reallocating existing resources to some of those new priorities. We also need to review some of our major projects just to ensure adequate risk assessments are done and consider where relevant, potentially reprofiling some activity. I would stress, however, that does not mean stopping everything. And there are many projects that the council has got plans to do, which in many ways become even more critical to support the economy. So throughout all this recovery, we do need to place public health and well-being at the heart of what we do. It clearly is an immense challenge for the future to take forward. However, I think we can take strength from how the city has responded to date in the crisis. And I think by utilising the huge strengths of the city, the organisations, and of course residents, we can come out of this in the coming months and years and rise up to that great challenge. I'll stop there, Chair, and obviously happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Ian. So I'll bring in executive members with any comments or questions in a little bit. So just a reminder to start raising your virtual hands if you want to come in and say something. But if I could just add to what you just said, really echoing the thank you first. So we know that we owe a big thank you to council staff, volunteers, partners, communities and businesses in the way that they've responded over the last few weeks and days and really making sure that that support is getting through, particularly to the most vulnerable individuals, neighbours and family members who need that help, particularly now more than ever. And it has meant a huge number of people are working and living differently. So for the fact that this meeting is held virtually, to the way businesses are redoubling their efforts to deliver services in different ways, to the neighbour collecting prescriptions for those that can't go out, to the council officer working double time over the 2 bank holiday weekends to make sure business grants are paid out. Hugely appreciate all of the effort that people and sacrifices that people are putting in. When we last met as a executive in West offices, and I said that was the last of that type of meeting for the foreseeable future for us, we did move quickly, particularly to establish emergency funds for individuals, for communities, and also for businesses. And we know just in terms of the uptake on those funds, how much they've been needed, whether it's to support with food and white goods, through to business costs that aren't currently met through a government scheme. And as an executive, I know that we're committed to making sure that emergency funding to support people is in place. And that work is going to continue, whether it be through community hubs, emergency grants, or the work in children's social care and adult social care throughout the period, as we now start to look and think about what recovery means for York. But that in itself is going to require an awful lot of people, all of those groups I just thanked, to keep working together for York and to make sure that we come through that recovery in the strongest possible way. And that's why we also need national help. A lot of other councils and the local government association have made it absolutely clear, and I do tonight, that it is going to be one of our corporate priorities to make sure that we get the right level of support from the government, not just for the council, but then crucially in terms of those services that the council delivers to individuals and community groups. The money that we've had so far from the government, which is just over 10 million now, is welcome, but it's absolutely nowhere near the amount that we're going to have to spend, as predicted in the papers tonight, around the level of 35 million, to either meet additional demand, keep all of those services going, or to make up for lost income for the council. And we will be banging that drum as loud and clear for York and for all councils across the country, that we need that support in order to keep those services going. And then just to echo Ian's final points, as an executive, we will absolutely ensure that those crucial services, particularly for the most vulnerable, and also those major projects that will kickstart our economy, continue. And we're absolutely committed to making that happen. And I wonder at this stage, before I go round to executive members, I'll go back to Ian first, and then Debbie, if you would like to come in just to pick up the particular point about the financial challenge. And obviously you may not want to comment on the lobbying efforts in terms of making sure that the government recognises the impact that this will have on the local government family and what we can deliver. So Ian first.
Yeah, it was just a point to actually note the and Debbie might have been going to mention that and can give a bit more detail, but on Para 76, the figure that we talk about in terms of funding, that just refers to the first phase. So I think it's just worth to note that if we can just amend that, note that, and Debbie might just want to confirm the precise figure, but since the last couple of weeks we've had a further release of government funding, so it's just to note that figure on 76 is not accurate, and if we just amend that.
Thank you, Ian. Debbie.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, as Ian mentioned, there was a slight update to the main report in that paragraph where we did get a second allocation of funding, and that was a further 5.7 million to add to the 4.7 million we got in the first tranche. So the annex itself provides an early indication of the potential financial impact of the pandemic on the council's finances, and it highlights what could be a significant shortfall in funding, but it's clearly very early in the financial year, so it's difficult to make any reliable forecasts, and it will of course very much need to be reviewed as and when any restrictions are eased or there are any other changes that we need to take account of. So it's very much a live document where we are reviewing the finances. Expenditures being incurred on a range of issues to respond to the pandemic, particularly in relation to PPE and adult social care. We have also implemented government guidance when dealing with our suppliers and supply chain to try and support those businesses wherever possible. And as we progress over the coming weeks and months, like I said, we will need to review our financial position and carefully consider how we reprioritise our resources to allow us to find that investment and to meet the changing needs of the city and our residents. So we'll continue to monitor the financial impact and we'll report back to executive as necessary.
Thank you very much. So I can see quite a lot of hands of people that want to come in and make comments. So I'll go to Councillor Runciman first.
Thank you.
You're on.
Right, thank you. We owe an enormous debt of gratitude to everybody in all the aspects of the health service, not just to the CCG and all the health service staff, the people in Chew who do the mental health services and their new hospital at Foss Island, which was opened just at the right time, but also to all the people in care homes who have been working so hard during this COVID-19 outbreak. We really do owe them a lot. but I particularly want to thank the staff of the council who have gone above and beyond in everything that they've done. The public health staff who've been helping in all sorts of ways, particularly with testing and with other aspects where the CCG needed some help, and the adult social care staff who've been absolutely working their socks off, making sure that people can get out of hospital and home safely with the support that they need. It's been an astonishing effort on everybody's part. The use of volunteers has taught us a lot. We've got a lot of volunteers in York, and it's really quite amazing how people will step up and volunteer at a time like this. And we want to go on using them. They have been immensely helpful in supporting the efforts, not just very simple things, perhaps like collecting a prescription, which actually could be life or death to somebody, but also some very skilled volunteers who've been able to put support into social workers in various aspects. And I would hope when we get the recovery plan that we shall see something about that. So huge thanks to everybody. And the effort is not over in public health and adult social care. The effort has got to go on and may have to go on for some time, because we know there are still infections and there are still, unfortunately, deaths, and we hope that they're getting less and less. That's what the data seems to show us, but we've got to be alert for anything. And the staff in health and adult social care will be doing exactly that. So thanks to you all.
Thank you. Next, I can see Councillor de Gorn. The unmute button is off, but I can't hear you, Andy. So what I'll do is I'll go on to another councillor whilst you just check your connection. Councillor Craghill.
Right, sorry for that delay. Can you hear me okay?
We can, yes.
Yeah. Yes, I also really wanted to thank the staff in my portfolio areas for all the work that they've been doing. They've all been doing a tremendous job. Many of them working on the front line of the emergency. For example, in homelessness services, where they've not only been getting rough sleepers into accommodation, but also ensuring that that much large group of people in our hostels, emergency, temporary and settlement accommodation can all be housed individually where needed and able to self-isolate and shield where necessary. There's also staff in our homelessness prevention services who continue to work hard to prevent people becoming homeless in these really difficult times, particularly. Building services staff who've been making empty council properties available as quickly as they possibly can, whilst also dealing with the challenges of having to social distance. Adaptation staff who've been making properties suitable for people leaving hospital to be cared for at home and freeing up places in hospital. Our housing management staff who've been rewound as many vulnerable residents as they can to make sure that they're okay and follow up on any support needs that they find. And also community safety staff who are continuing to tackle antisocial behaviour, whilst also working with the police to ensure that social distancing takes place and that people stay safe. Other housing staff have been redeployed to support the customer centre or help to manage the volunteer effort. And some of them have also finally been continuing with the planning and preparatory work that's needed to support the delivery of new homes in the city, which will hopefully be a part of that recovery that other people have referred to. And obviously we'll hear more as we go forward about the plans that people are making for the challenges and potentially opportunities during the recovery process. But thank you to all that staff for their hard work.
Thank you very much, Councillor Craghill. Councillor de Gorn, let's give it another go. So no, it's not having it. What I would say is take out your headset and see if that jolts it into action, and I'll come back to you one last one last time in a second. Councillor Waller, let's go to you next.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's been important for businesses caught up in the closures related to lockdown to receive the support quickly in terms of cash flow, in terms of paying their wages, and also keeping on good terms with suppliers. So I'd like to thank the City of York Council staff for the fast processing of the applications. They've managed to get through 90% of them. We're recognising there are still some left, and they'll be working through those final ones with great detail. And I think it's worth remembering that many of the government announcements are made before the details are supplied to council staff from civil servants at Whitehall. And so there is a bit of a delay there, but it's not of council officers doing. And I appreciate the comments that have come directly from companies explaining to me the situations that they find themselves in, and why they may not be included in particular waves of government schemes, and therefore that triggered the local micro business scheme. And we'll be trying to ensure that the very latest government scheme that we are told that we won't get the details until Tuesday includes many of those businesses that haven't been included already. And I'm grateful to councillors from all parties who've been in touch to explain the predicaments of businesses in their own patch, so that experience is shared. So I think it is important to recognise the efforts that businesses have gone to remain in operation, that they've had to overnight design themselves, and like to pay tribute to the efforts that they've made, and to the many businesses that have suddenly found themselves in the front line. I think that supermarkets and the food retailers really have had to pull out all the stops to keep the city functioning. So I'd like to pay tribute to those staff who've really shown their quality in recent weeks. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Waller. And I have been told that we think Councillor de Gourn's sound is back on. So Councillor de Gourn.
I'm unmuted, it says. Can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, good. Right. For the third time lucky. Yes, I wanted to just again thank all the staff who've worked really hard. Not just the highways and transport staff, but also I'm sure other members may well mention the emergency planning. You know, we've had an exceptional period when we've gone from responding to floods to almost straight away back into one of the most exceptional emergency situations we've ever experienced, going on over a number of weeks and months now. So that is certainly credit to the staff and how they've had to adapt. In terms of my specific transport areas, the work that's gone on with the bus operators, I think, is commendable. We've agreed with the bus operators as sort of a skeleton service which has continued to provide essential transport for key workers and for others to get about. And because of that work that's been put in place, we're now in a good position to work with them quite closely on the recovery and moving towards a new normal of what we're likely to be experiencing for months going forward as lockdown restrictions are eased. Also, I just want to mention the fact that highways work, maintenance work is going ahead. We've developed social distancing protocols and procedures. So, like for example, next week the Monk Bar Junction work will be which was suspended in the initial period to allow staff to be available for other crisis work. That is now going to be completed and finished off. And in many cases, people will see reports about major work, resurfacing work going ahead on major arterial roads, because the traffic levels are really light at the moment. It is a good opportunity for us to try and make those improvements as efficiently as possible with staff following the guidelines to keep everybody safe in the process. And inevitably, there will be situations where, just as before, unexpected utility works are required, and we have to adapt quite quickly to that circumstance. So if there's a sewer collapse or a gas main that needs to be replaced, all those sorts of things are being dealt with almost unseen by majority of the population. So I certainly commend the work that's been done to keep things moving and keep everyone safe, not just from the point of view of the COVID-19, but also the normal practices that we need to follow. And lastly, I would sort of just say that certainly I think everyone has noticed the massive improvement in air quality that's arisen from the very low traffic levels, which again, all credit to our population for following the guidance and staying safe, stay home, and only making essential journeys. What we want to try and do as we move towards the recovery phase, it's going to be very difficult for a lot of businesses to adapt to social distancing, which they think may well continue, need a requirement for months, at least possibly to the end of the year. And if businesses are going to be able to have customers, then they need to adapt to that circumstance to allow that 2 metre separation between customers, where they're queuing outside shops or they're using cafes and bars later on, if that is allowed by government guidance. So we want to work very closely with business community, with residents and everyone, operators and so on, to make sure that we have the best possible outcome, and we can move towards it, slowly move towards a planned new normal, even though we're sort of working on a 3 week to 3 week timetable in terms of knowing exactly what the government's guidance is going to be. So everyone's working really hard to try and make everything be joined up and work together.
Thank you very much. Just a reminder, if anybody does want to come in, to raise your virtual hands, otherwise I might not get through to everybody at the end. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I want to echo the comments everybody else has made in terms of thanking the staff for the effort they've put in throughout this entire period. I think I wanted to focus particularly a little bit around business and customer support. It's not an area that people always spend that much time thinking of, but I think one of the things I do want to mention is that people are obviously under enormous strain anyway in terms of how they're dealing and coping with the virus, but they've also been put under additional pressure and additional strain. So a team that has obviously relocated out of West offices was presented with a £45 million government scheme with no real details about how that particular processing would work. Dealing with companies that we've never had a financial relationship as a council and trying to get monies out to those and getting the bank accounts and details of that. So I think, as Councillor Waller has already kind of mentioned, a huge and amazing effort to get over 3,000 payments out to individual businesses, £40 million and 90% of the funding that we received from government. And I think it was a testament to the work that they've done that when the first league table was presented, York was in the top 10 of all local authorities in terms of the amount of money we were able to get out at that particular period of time. It's not just been about businesses, a huge amount of support going out to residents. So we were very quick to make that step forward and make sure that we expanded the Wi-Fi scheme, extra £1.2 million into that hardship fund. We've had over 531 additional requests for council tax support. And it's worth noting that we've also been able to process an extra £1 million in council tax support, both to those 531 additional claimants and to the existing claimants through some of the government funding. Councillor Waller also alluded to the fact that we have been given an extra £2.2 million to help support businesses that were not supported through the initial financial schemes. As he said, we did step forward as a council very early on to acknowledge that and put forward £1 million of our own support from our own funding to make sure those businesses got money as quickly as possible. But obviously I welcome the fact that the government has now finally come around to realising that those are areas that also need particular support. Again, that will put a significant amount of pressure on staff in terms of how we process those payments, how we deal with those payments. And I know they're doing a great deal of work with other local authorities in the region to make sure we can get some level of consistency to make sure that businesses get the type of support that they need. The customer centre has continued to perform excellently under new circumstances, with all our team working from home. While we have seen around a 35% drop in terms of sort of standard inquiries that we would see through the customer call centre, seen over 2,000 additional calls specifically around COVID and nearly 1,500 emails specifically around that. So huge amounts of pressure, but we're getting that information, we're getting that support out to people in a timely and effective manner. And then I think picking up on the points you made at the beginning, Councillor Afton, around the financial challenges that we're facing. There are clear challenges on both expenditure and income that we're facing as a local authority. The government was very quick to get the message out that councils would get all they need to help them deal with this particular crisis. At the beginning of this month, there were very big rumours that they were starting to step back on that. Government ministers making claims that they wouldn't necessarily live up to that promise. Again, yesterday, I saw a reversal in terms of whether they may or may not continue to do that. As local authorities, we really need the clarity and assurance that the financial support that we need will be forthcoming and some of those extra guarantees. But to make it clear, as we have done throughout this process, we will continue to do what needs to be done to make sure we support the residents and businesses of this city.
Thank you very much. Councillor Myers.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I too would like to pay my respects to those in our city who've lost loved ones through this period and greatly welcome efforts of all staff across our authority in pulling together the coronavirus response. This week I've signed an open letter from Unite the Union to say that our council staff are worth more, and what needs highlighting is that over the last 10 years real terms average wages for council workers have fallen by 22%. So what the current outbreak brings into sharp focus is the need for a fair pay rise for all workers delivering local authority services, not to mention NHS and care workers in our health and social care services. A reckoning of the value we place on those delivering core key services must now happen. On the report, Chair, regarding paragraph 43, I remain concerned about the impact of our local response upon children. And whilst I've raised this matter for a number of weeks internally, I do feel I must stress the Labour Group's concerns about the free school meals system, fully understanding the delays to vouchers and also the incredible local responses we've seen from volunteer organisations and schools and council staff who've been working all hours passionately to try and sort and improve this area. But there does remain concern about how many children are at risk of not receiving a single hot meal each day whilst schools have been in the whole closed. Families receiving food parcels instead of vouchers have raised concerns about a lack of fresh food being provided and an inability to create meals from the food packages. And further to that, a replacement sandwich and packed lunch, in my view, is not adequate replacement for a hot meal. There is goodwill enough from staff, of course, local businesses and volunteer groups to deliver a service that doesn't stigmatise and doesn't accept a further widening of inequalities in our city. So I'm raising that now with you to ask you to consider it and to step in and ensure every child has access to a hot meal each school day, and to go further and address what we've been calling for some time, and that's to deliver a strategy to feed children through the summer holiday months, which could see an acute rise in people needing that support. And of course, because of that, we know that there will be children that are hungry in our city. Finally, on bereavement services, paragraph 60, the report wording doesn't say that there's a gap between closing the crematorium for services and outside services then being allowed. Do we know how many families were denied attendance at cremations, and if the City Council provided an official apology to those families? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Just taking those different points, I'll bring Amanda in a second just to give her a warning so she can turn her camera on. And in terms of overarching response, I completely agree with you that it's an opportunity for everybody to think about the value of those key workers. So whether it's people on living wage, working in supermarkets, for the council, for the NHS, or student nurses. And there was a big campaign launched today on student nurse tuition. I think it's an opportunity for everybody to bring that to the attention, and the people that have really kept those services going that everybody needs, and those that are most vulnerable need. And I'm certainly very happy to make that part of those lobbying and national efforts to make that case. The question that you raised, I'm sure, is again one that we would all agree in terms of food packages, schools and free school meals. Wonder whether, Amanda, you could give us a little bit more information on efforts to date, what we've done over and above what the government initially gave, and then what we could do moving forward.
Absolutely. For some reason, my video hasn't come back on, so apologies for that.
I can hear you. I'll just check. Can everybody else? Yeah, I'm seeing nods, so please carry on.
Great. We move fast as a city, and I think it's really important to stress how well all of the schools, regardless of whether or not they're academies or maintained schools, have worked together across the city as part of this difficult period. All of the schools provided free school meals for those children who were entitled to free school meals at the point at which the school closures happened. And it is also important to say that schools aren't closed. Schools have still got vulnerable pupils and pupils of key workers within the schools. That was very successful, and what predated the national scheme by a number of weeks. The national scheme then came in, and Councillor Myers is correct to say that there were some initial challenges with that, particularly with supply of the vouchers. Where that was the case, schools continued with the local arrangements that they had made, and those arrangements ranged from some schools providing hot meals, some providing packed lunches, some providing vouchers, and some providing money. Most of the schools in the city have now moved over to the voucher scheme, and the voucher scheme does seem to be working better. Where families were in difficulty, we've also referred them through to the community hubs and ensured that they've had appropriate food through hub support. We are working as part of the recovery planning at the moment to look at how we support families who are in poverty as a consequence of COVID going forward, and particularly picking up the issues of food poverty during the summer period. Many of you will know that last summer we had some very successful programs through the community hubs in relation to food provision for vulnerable families, and that provision will continue during the next period and over the summer period. And we're also looking at how we can build on the community hubs that we've had in place to make sure that we can reach out to more families during that period. Finally, we have had nutritional support in relation to what goes into those food packages, and I'm aware of one family where there was an issue in relation to the content of the package, but no more have been brought to my attention. And I meet with the York Schools and Academies Board 3 times a week, and as part of that standing agenda item, we do look at free school meals and making sure we've got appropriate and adequate supply.
Thank you very much. And on the last point you raised, Councillor Myers, the decision in relation to York Crematorium, and I know also equally at Fulford Cemetery, were some of the toughest decisions that council staff and councillors, I suspect, will have to be involved with. And many of us have given our condolences and obviously thoughts to the families that have been affected. And that action was partly taken at the time through the absolute desire to protect life, and also to protect our staff and those key workers at the crematorium, to make sure that they could keep doing the service that they were doing, but at a point where sadly we saw, and we are still seeing, the death rate and the pressure on undertakers rise in the city. but to make sure that we can continue to do that important job, not just actually for York, but also potentially to support other neighbouring local authorities. And that's why others like Leeds and Bradford councils made that difficult decision at the time. But I think it is worth saying that the arrangements put in place to make sure that there were services either outside or a celebrant inside, but equally the promise that we made that we would contact and have communication with all families affected throughout this period of time to make sure that they were offered a service of remembrance at York Crematorium at a time when it was reopened, and also citywide services. And you'll have seen the announcement from the Minster, but equally there are going to be other faith events happening across York that I'm very committed to supporting, to giving people as much comfort, or at least some comfort as possible throughout that really difficult time. I can see two more hands have indicated, so I'll go to Councillor Widdowson.
I'd just like to echo the thanks for all the key workers and the frontline workers across the council that have done a cracking job. You'll have seen all the different announcements about waste. All of the waste services will be back in place by the 18th of May. We've got a new system where you can book into the waste sites, which recognises your registration so that your booking in slot is for you and for you alone. We've got the green bins back in place, which we're hoping will be cleared over the next 2 or 3 collections. And we've got the bulky waste back. So the guys have done an absolutely fantastic job in restoring all the waste services across the city.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Smalley.
Thank you. I'd just like to pay special thanks to the 4,000 York residents who responded to our call for volunteers, and a special thank you to those supporting the council's response and supporting the work of York's brilliant charities. Their efforts of being involved on the front line, either working in hubs or as a volunteer delivery driver on standby, is an example of the dedicated service that both the council and our community partners have provided during this outbreak. It's now been 5 weeks since we opened the 9 community hubs on Friday, the 27th of March. And I guess if someone had told me 5 weeks ago that by today, we'd have made use of over 18,000 volunteer hours, delivered over 1,000 extra food parcels on top of the government deliveries, and supported York's over 2,500 medically shielded residents with food, social contact, health and other needs, I might not have believed it. To quickly pick up on Councillor Myers' point on food parcels, I agree, and we're working to make sure that the council's own food parcels that are going out are sufficient. Where necessary, we're completing dedicated food shops for residents, for those that are shielding, and we're checking day by day that residents have what they need to maintain a healthy diet. Of course, we can't control what's in the government's food parcels, but we have been feeding back both to MHCLG and the LRF where the food parcels are not sufficient. And there have been many instances where we've had to top up what residents receive from government, and we'll continue to do that where necessary. And thank you, a final thank you to everyone that made that whole process possible and continue to do so. I'd just like to also mention the work of the cultural, creative and leisure sectors through this crisis, from the brilliant work of York Explore in providing online library services, to York Theatre and the National Centre for Early Music live streaming world leading performances, to York Museums Trust in their work creating the curator battles on social media, keeping us all entertained with the weird and the wonderful that we have in our collections. The way that these sectors have responded in York are quite frankly an example to the rest of the country. We have been lobbying alongside Make It York, Visit York, York's Cultural Leaders Group and many other organisations for more support from government. That's both asking for additional support for those institutions and businesses themselves, and critically those that are self-employed or freelance in those sectors. We will continue this effort until we can be sure that the institutions and staff that makes York such a great place to live are protected. I'd like to finish by saying a big thank you to all those institutions, those self-employed, those employed and freelanced, in the cultural, creative and leisure sectors for helping to keep our spirits high whilst they themselves are going through the most difficult circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've all sort of obviously spoken about different things that are happening in the city and in our portfolio areas, and Ian in his update at the start touched upon recovery, and I know the work that our local resilience forum and we are doing. You've got the recommendation in front of you on the update report, but I would like to add an extra recommendation just to make it really clear that we would like a report to come to the next executive meeting, likely to be in June, that specifically picks up our recovery plans and what we're doing, but also what we can do with our partners to make sure that we're having that conversation and communicating with residents as clearly as possible. So I'd like to propose that extra recommendation. Is anybody happy to second it? If you either show Councillor Runciman, the quickest hand, Councillor Runciman. I think we'll just wait for you to be unmuted.
I think I'm on, yes.
Yeah.
I'm happy to second that. I think that's what we're working towards now, and to see that report in June would be very useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we've got in front of us the recommendation from this report, obviously now proposed and seconded with that additional recommendation to receive a specific report on the recovery. Can I please see those in favour of that? Thank you very much. So that's a clear consensus in favour of that recommendation and the new recommendation as part of that report. And likewise, could I thank again partners, officers, communities, volunteers for all of their work that goes in and behind that overview report, and the huge amount of effort that I know everybody in York will continue to put in. We now move to agenda item 7, amendments to standing orders. Doesn't sound very exciting, but it is the bit of the report that has enabled us to have this first virtual meeting. So it's a really important step forward in terms of the way that we're doing things. Janie Berry's going to introduce the report to us. Janie.
Thank you, Chair. This is my report as the City of York's monitoring officer to formally note, firstly, the changes to our standing orders in the Constitution so that we can provide for remote meetings going forward for the period of 4th of April 2020 through to 7th of May 2021. And secondly, in accordance with the terms of our Constitution, it is to formally provide a record of the decisions which have been made under the urgent decision-making guidance for the period of 23rd of March to the 7th of April 2020. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much for that. And I think my only comment really is that we've tried out our first Facebook Live Q&A Ask the Leaders that went well. This is our first executive meeting, which hopefully technologically is going well. I know we're going to bring forward planning and licensing, and we're going to do another live Ask the Leaders event just to make sure that we're engaging with residents and groups and different people in this period of time as much as possible. And I know that's going to be increasingly important. And as Janie just said, the second part of this report, which is just noting the significant number of decisions that have been made to enable the council to act quickly and deliver those crucial services and support when it was most needed. I'm looking for any raised hands in case there are any questions or comments for Janie, but as just said, this is a report to note for us. So Councillor Myers.
Thank you, Chair. Just a really quick one on paragraph 16. If I could ask about public participation and any barriers to that particular part of the democratic process getting up and running as quickly as possible.
Janie?
We are trying to accommodate public participation as much as we possibly can. We're providing for public participants to telephone into the meetings so that if there are any unforeseen IT issues, at least we can connect with them via the mobile telephone or their home landline, because we're trying to accommodate every member of the public and recognise that some may not have internet access. So we are trying to be as accessible as possible, and there will be details on our website for democratic services about how to contact us and register to speak.
Thank you very much. And I think it's very, very important to say that in many ways, the system for the meetings that happen will be exactly the same. So the papers will get published 5 days ahead. They'll have the information of our Democratic Services team for any resident that wants to register to speak or send us a written submission. And I encourage people for the next meeting to get involved from home, watch the meetings and engage in that way. That would be appreciated. I can't see any other hands up, so we've got the recommendation, which is to note the report as outlined by Janie. Can I please see those in favour of doing so? Thank you very much. So that's a clear consensus in favour of the recommendations on report 7. That then moves us through to agenda item 8, which is urgent business. I haven't been told that there is any urgent business, so I'm not going to let you raise your hands and come in at this point. But just to say thank you to everybody, the officers that have joined the call, the officers working behind the scenes to make this first virtual meeting work, and I know all of the staff partners, businesses and communities that are going to continue to respond to this very fast changing situation that we all find ourselves in. But just a final note, tomorrow is VE Day, and I'm sure all of you will be looking back on what 75 years of peace in Europe has meant to you and your family, as we say thank you to those that were involved 75 years ago, but also actually about how the community individuals are coming together, helping each other and supporting each other, which I know that we will continue to do. So on that note, I thank you all for joining us, and I'll see you at the next executive meeting in June. Bye-bye.